Imagine a cemetery crammed with grim graves. Somewhere 2 meters into the lumpy mud, there's a skeleton wearing a traditional Austrian vest along with a 19th century suit. Now imagine that a man comes with a huge shovel and begins digging. He digs for a long time, but the coffin is nowhere to be found. Doubts flood the worker's mind. Perhaps there is no coffin, perhaps it's all just a huge misunderstanding. But then he hits the hard piece of oak. He gently opens the wooden box and picks up whatever was left from the skeleton. He proceeds to carry the corpse into his car and changes its clothes into a new modern t-shirt along with a pair of ripped jeans. Now he placed the body on the passenger seat in his car and stared at it for a long while. Now you might be asking where I'm going with this confusing and probably unrealistic metaphor. Well, this is how I perceive Sigmund Freud's work. Yes, digging into the old theories is indeed a huge challenge. However, after placing them into modern context, they might as well revolutionize the world of science and culture once again. And proving this point in a scientific manner is out of my reach, as I am still just a high school student. However, after profoundly observing certain social changes in the Freudian context, I believe that we can still save the fascinating persona of Sigmund Freud. Now, whether Freud was scientifically right about anything at all is quite a complicated issue for numerous reasons. One of them is that we have to remember when he was expounding his theories, the scientific method was just a newborn baby of the human species. Apart from that, the Austrian psychiatrist didn't really obtain his theories in a scientific way. He first came up with an idea and later tried his best to prove it. And this led to a series of manipulations and other highly immoral behaviors of the scientists. And a perfect example of how Freud worked is the Oedipus Complex, which at his time was certainly a revolutionary theory. And it wasn't based scientifically, nor was it justified by a substantial number of cases. It was actually based on only one case, which was Sigmund Freud himself. And I do not mean that every single Freudian theory is wrong, but if it is somewhat relevant, it is most likely to be a severe simplification of the reality, which also seems to apply to the theory of personality posited by Freud. The scientists distinguished three parts of our minds: the id, ego, and superego. We have to underscore that a part of this statement is certainly true, and it's the fact that we are not the masters of our own minds. And this is a significant thesis in the world of psychology. Now, the unconscious part of our brain, which Freud called the id, is supposed to be driven by the constant need for pleasure. But we all know that the human species would end in a very bad place and would fail morally if there wasn't a counter element that would control the wild part of our mind, which Freud called the superego. And it could be simplified to what we know as morality, because it prohibits, inhibits, and criticizes some of our behaviors. The scientist claimed that the two warriors of our psyche fought, and sometimes one of them began to dominate. And that's when we develop fixations and personality disabilities. Once again, I'd like to emphasize that I do not aim at proving Freud's point in any scientific way, as it's simply out of my abilities. However, I'd like to provoke you to think how this particular theory changed its meaning due to the innovation that we're actually experiencing nowadays. Let's talk about something that is commonly referred to as the 21st century plague, something that psychologically ruins our generation of young people. And it is pornography that I'm talking about. Freud emphasized the significance of psychosexuality in the role of personality development. And my hypothesis is that since even the youngest of us have access to the internet, that it has way more room for action. And obviously we are all unique people, so I do not mean that we are heading towards a gradual demoralization as a society, but rather as certain individuals. And as I already mentioned, the superego could be simplified to what we know as the morality. And undoubtedly, the new era provides us with different tools that help us to boost the morality. However, I'm afraid that the negative aspect of this is far more concerning. So, at 9 years old, 100 years ago, the best thing he could do was stealing his father's erotic photos from under his bed. However, today it's a lot to take in for a creature that hasn't even fully comprehended what sex is. And getting to know such an essential topic from a wildly artificial pornographic film is, in fact, a huge advantage of the id. So let's suppose that our mind consists of two warriors who fight for thousands and thousands of years with the same iron swords. And now that 60% of the world population has access to the internet, it's like giving one of them a new, more powerful and innovative weapon. In this case, obviously, it is the one receiving. And therefore, we can quite easily predict that the result will be psychological impairment. And this pattern can be noticed in many other examples unrelated to psychosexuality. A great example of what the new era gives us, except for pornography, is the unlimited range of synthesized drugs. And such substances were, of course, present in the human history for thousands and thousands of years, but they weren't produced in labs that were specifically created for this purpose and weren't created on such a massive scale. It's also possible to order such substances on the internet, which makes it absurdly easy to do something not only harmful but illegal and possibly lethal. So it could be argued that there is no proof for the existence of things such as the id, ego, and superego, which is certainly a valid point, since the truth is that we don't know a lot about our minds and our psychology. But what we do know about is that there is something that we call morality. We are also aware of a constant need for the hormone dopamine, which is a reward system for us humans. So even if Freud indeed was a morally deprived and quite immoral scientist, even if his theories were harmful and methods of therapy weren't helpful at all, even if he was a gender-obsessed and sexist man, he's the one person that created modern psychology as we know it today. So let's just treat him as a gardener who grew some fascinating theories in his field of psychology. And I think it's a great time to check up on them and deeply observe their place in today's world. Because by what I've just said, I hopefully proved that we can still save Sigmund Freud.